What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Crazy Face Uno podcast, where everyone has a story, everyone's story matters. What's your story? As always, I'm your host, Shane McNeely, and boy, are you in for a treat today. I'm excited to introduce my guest today. His name is David Hayward. He is widely recognized as the Naked Pastor. Graffiti on the Walls of Religion. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, Shane. Good to be here.
Absolutely. We were talking a little bit beforehand, and I had just learned of you through one of my friends and one of my podcast guests, Janelle Pauls, and she's a big fan of yours and a fan of your art, and you kind of reached out to me, or posted like, hey, I do interviews, and I was like, cool, let's do this. And I've been learning more about you, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
Cool. Me too.
So you go by the Naked Pastor on Instagram, and that's kind of your on your website, right. And that's your name on the internet. I wrote down, you kind of went in a little bit more on your about section on Instagram. And it says, like any graffiti artist, I use my images and words to challenge the status quo of religion and to offer hope for those who struggle and suffer under it. And I really love that. I think that's great. Do you want to just maybe go into that a little bit more about where the name came from, and a little bit about, your background, I guess?
Sure. Naked Pastor, a lot of people are asked that question. That's also in my FAQ. But the reason I call myself Naked Pastor is because I wanted to write a blog from a pastor's perspective. I was a pastor of a local congregation, and I wanted to just be honest, vulnerable, real, raw.
Yeah.
And just tell it like it was. Let people peek behind the veil and see what really goes on in the life of a pastor. So I use the word Naked Pastor as one word. Naked Pastor. Don't Google naked and then pastor, because you'll see things you can't unsee. But so Naked Pastor, one word. And it just kind of described what I was trying to do. So along with the honesty that I wanted to communicate in, like the raw honesty, I wanted to really tell it like it was. I don't know how it popped into my head of graffiti, because I don't just write, I draw pictures as well.
Right.
And I just thought, well, graffiti artists on the walls of religion.
Yeah,
I thought it was a good way to describe what I do. And a lot of people might think graffiti artists are defacing property. In one way, they are. In another way, they care about these things that are going on enough to communicate their unrest and their questions, and to challenge, like I said, to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
Try to get people to think outside the box. So that's what I try to do on my blog.
That's awesome. Vulnerability and authenticity, it's dangerous, especially as a pastor, which is sad to say in some ways.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, when I was a pastor, for about 30 years, and I was actually telling my story, and people would respond, "You're not allowed to think like that."
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, here's a news alert. I'm a pastor, and I actually do think like that. So you have to somehow figure out how those two fit together. And so that experiment of me just being honest, I think, and getting, criticized for it, judged for it, silenced for it, all that kind of thing, I think it developed an ability in me to get even more honest, and maybe a little more daring in the things I would say. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and just so people know, I mean, Yes, you were a pastor, but you have a bachelor's degree in Bible and theology. You have a master's degree in theology studies, in New Testament, a diploma in ministry. You're ordained to the ministry. You've served at local churches for
Right.
about 30 years. I like you put in one of your questions was, so basically you studied the Bible inside and out and love to help people. And so like you're no slouch. You're not coming to this just as some guy off the street. Even if you were, that's awesome. But I think that kind of speaks to the level of, you understand what you're saying and you understand, the words that are coming out of your mouth and what it means,
Right. That like, yeah, like I like to tell people that, especially people who want to argue with me about what the Bible says.
Yeah.
And I want them to know that like you said, I'm not a slouch in that department. Like I took the Bible and still do, by the way, very seriously, studied it inside and out. I took years of Greek, years of Hebrew, a year of Aramaic. I did the whole, I did the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And so when somebody comes at me with, you need to read the Bible, it's just very frustrating.
It's a head scratcher.
That's why I put it in my FAQ.
Yeah.
Please read my FAQ. I have read the Bible.
Yeah.
and I do know what it says. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I touched on it a little bit before we got recording, but I was a youth ministry major in college, being, quote, trained or taught to be a youth pastor. My background is I grew up in the church. My dad was a pastor for 18 years, and he eventually left the ministry himself. And I still went into that area of study nonetheless. And it was about my junior year of college when some of the verbiage that you've used is the deconstruction, when I began to kind of deconstruct my faith. If you've been listening to the podcast, you've heard me talk about this, but the question, me and a buddy were talking about, religion and God, and it was actually God and war is what we were talking about. And, we had been reading some books and whatever, and we were just debating about this at the lunch table one day, and I had my own side of things and he had his, and whatever it was, I honestly couldn't quite tell you what exactly our conversation was, but at the end of it, he goes, "But why do you believe that?" And it was that question that threw me into the deconstruction of my faith in so many ways. I didn't have an answer at the time, and I have no shortage of words usually, and so that threw me off just in and of itself. And eventually it came to the conclusion that it's because that's what I've always known. That's what I was taught. That's what I was told. And it wasn't what I believed. It was what I had just known, And so I started deconstructing, and I feel like in more recent years, I've been reconstructing in some ways of kind of just building that foundation of what is it that I do believe. And, went through all the different those different stages. I know you have a YouTube video on that too, is like deconstruction of just deconstruction in general, and kind of like the emotions, and you go through grief and you go through all these different things. I found myself, eventually giving myself permission to not go to church. And that was one of the biggest, like, breath of fresh air, it was just this weight off my shoulders that I'd finally given myself permission. And I find myself today just a different place. And just, I think that faith and religion, I think it has a place in this world. I think it's important for some people. And, I think we both agree that, I know you wrote down that love is the only answer. And I really agree with that as well. And continually going back to that drawing board and saying, like, man, it's love and loving people. And if that's what you believe and that's what you want, like, if that's what makes you a better person, if that makes you love people better and deeper and greater, then okay, like, that's fine. Like, be that. But we need to continue to love. Right.
Well, your friend who asked you that question, I don't know if he asked you that accidentally or if he knew what he was doing or if he's very wise, because that's a a really excellent question.
Yeah.
Why do you believe that? Because a lot of people, their immediate response would be, well, because the Bible says, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
It's just, but they don't examine that, their minds. They don't examine their thinking.
Right.
And the fact that that question did that to you is really quite amazing, actually. Because that is the crucial question. Why do you believe that? And the answer always will be because I've been conditioned to.
Yeah, right. And it's such a good question. I mean, that why question in general is just one that kind of permeates. Mm-hmm. It's a very important question in my life these days. There's several books. I read a book, Simon Sinek, Start With Why, and it's more business minded, but it permeates through just life in general of why, asking the questions, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Why do I respond the way I respond to certain situations? And like you said, oftentimes it comes back down to that's how I was conditioned, and kind of breaking those conditioned thoughts and processes. And that's it's vulnerability. It's being authentic and being true. And that's something that I really care about myself, and something that I really strive to be is the most authentic that I can be. And I think that being authentic is important in life. And the church, and maybe you can speak to some of this as well, I think that's maybe, as I kind of stated in the beginning, an area that the church isn't so welcoming with. It's this preconceived, this idea of what you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to be, and that you kind of are above the humanistic thoughts of the world, and those doubts and those challenges and those things that you go through. And even as a pastor, I saw it with my dad. My dad and I still have some of the most in-depth conversations about this, and it's not been something that he's even stop thinking about or let go of. It's something that permeates his life. It's something that's very foundational to who he is. And I think when we start to see each other as human beings and allow people to ask questions and create a safe environment, that we can foster just a greater understanding for one another. And in a lot of ways, that's what this space right here, this podcast and Crazy Face Uno, and what we're trying to build and create here is that everyone has a story. Your story really does matter. And that it doesn't matter what your story is, it still matters, and it's part of who you are, and we love you anyway. Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. Authenticity, I've always believed authenticity is a beautiful thing, and that we all should be authentic, and we all should be in, relationships and families and communities that encourage it and support it and everything. But we learned pretty quickly that, and not just in the church, in society in general, we learned pretty quickly that authenticity isn't, and the expression of it isn't as welcomed as we would like.
Yeah.
Like it's
100%.
We're slapped on the wrist pretty quickly and made to fall back in line.
I think it's a defense mechanism, though. I think it's this defense. People are like forced to actually confront their own feelings and emotions sometimes, and it's like, whoa.
Yep. Yeah, because one of the things, like I have an online community called The Lasting Supper, and one of the things, one of our chief values is that we respect one another wherever we're at. And that's what we value most, is mutual respect. And we listen before we speak, and we don't give advice unless we're asked. And as a result, it's basically a community for people who are deconstructing. And so we have a wide diversity of people, all the way from atheists to church-going believers, and even pastors and ex-pastors, and agnostics and so on.
Yeah.
And it's so diverse, and there's over 200 members in our group, and nobody's the same.
Yeah.
Because we encourage people to be themselves, to be authentic, and the result is a very diverse community, which is rare. Most communities want homogeneity. They want everybody to to be the same,
Yeah.
to subscribe to the same beliefs, to subscribe to the same lifestyle. And as a result, you end up with a very homogenous, kind of vanilla community and feeling of community.
Yeah.
Which, you cannot deviate from the norm, right? So you have to maintain the status quo.
Yeah. What do you?
But I think that creates very boring and lifeless and even deadly, community. I don't even want to call it a community.
Yeah.
Where I think the healthiest community is diverse, very diverse.
I agree. And I think it's that it creates the, when we talk about Christianese words, these catch lines and whatnot. I think that's what comes from that vanilla-y, community, especially within the Christian church. You just get it's that answer. Well, because the Bible says so, it's that answer versus actually thinking about it and digging deep. And I have my own idea or thought, but, because of this community that you've created, what do you think is necessary to foster a healthy environment like that?
Well, like I said, people, when they come into the community, they need to know right away that one of our chief values is authenticity.
Yeah.
And that we mean it.
Yeah.
Because every community says, we encourage you to be you.
Yeah, exactly.
But you learn pretty quickly what the parameters are, where the lines are. And so when we have a new member, I have to give them time to just get used to the fact that, hey, I'm not getting judged. I'm not being corrected. Nobody's giving me advice. I can just rant, share my story, and people hear me. And that's it. There's no ramifications. There's no punishment. There's no, retaliation. There's nobody stepping in to try to get me to fall back in line or to,
the evangelizing, balance, if you will.
Yeah. So it's very liberating. And once people catch on and realize, hey, this is real, they realize that such community is not just a dream, but a reality. And they learn how to treat others with that same kind of mutual respect, and create those kind of communities themselves around themselves. So it's that's how you've got to do it. And I did that in the local church here before I left. I left the ministry in 2010.
Yeah.
But the community I had, locally, flesh and blood, not online. It was the same way. You could come as you were. You could question your beliefs, our beliefs. You could be straight, gay, transgender, whatever. You could be. You could ask. You could question the theology of the Trinity, or you could question things about the Bible, and people could. They thought, oh yeah, I bet, sure, and then they would test it and realize, hey, it's true.
Yeah.
And people could actually really start their personal journeys of exploration and figuring out how they wanted to believe and how they wanted to live their lives and who they wanted to be and so on.
Yeah.
So it's
that's beautiful.
Once people realize it's real and possible, then they get comfortable with it and realize it's a real thing. It's not a pipe dream.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe what scares people from that, maybe you can speak to this, because I wanted to get to kind of your view on Christianity, what it means to be a Christian. But I think that idea, it challenges in some ways, it confronts or comes face to face with the, the fundamentals, the foundation of what the conservative Christian church sees as being a quote Christian, or what that means. I know some friends of mine, we've all been kind of dealing with this, coming from a conservative Christian college, and kind of all been dealing with our own faith journey and what that means for us. And, you know, one of my buddies, he says, well, when people ask me, you know, are you a Christian? I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And like, it's made me really think of it. Hasn't left my head since he said that, because I'm like, I don't call myself a Christian anymore. And like, that's just something I've said. But now that he said that, I'm like, okay, I get that. But like, what is it? I don't even know if I know what it means to be a Christian anymore. And so I guess with all of that said, what do you define as a Christian? Can you define it? Should it be defined? What are your thoughts on Christianity in general, or the doctrine that you've came from?
Yeah.
I know this is a deep one.
Yeah, man, you threw me in the deep end there. I get the same question all the time.
Yeah.
You know, on Instagram and wherever. I'm on all the social media platforms, but I get this all the time. It's like, are you a Christian?
Yeah.
You know, and are you really a Christian?
Yeah.
You know, by the way they're asking the question, you know, right off the bat, you're in trouble. And so I like to say, look, I grew up Christian. It's in my DNA.
Yeah.
It's my family of origin.
Yeah.
You know, I've moved out of the house.
Yeah.
But it's still my kind of family.
Yeah, I like that.
And I also say, you know, my home is in Christianity, but I have cottages everywhere.
Yeah.
that drives people crazy, because, you know, it sounds syncretistic or universalist or whatever. But, you know, Christians were called Christians by others first. In the New Testament, we learn that, right? It was a label applied from the outside. And that's where labels belong. They belong on the outside of the can, not on the inside. And they're always applied by others. And I have a lot of cartoons around that.
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
And, you know, I've given up on attempting to label myself. I don't worry about it. Like, when I come to that place of mind, I know I'm okay. I do not worry about what I am. And I leave that up to other people to, you know, stress out about what I am. Yeah. And
they will, and they do, I'm sure.
And they will, and they do. So I just, like I said, I believe, I love Christian theology.
Yeah.
Not all of it, of course, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, it's rich, and it's the philosophical aspect of it. To me, is very beautiful. And when you start getting into like the mystical thinkers and theologians and so on, like they're starting to speak my language. When you know, get into places like Meister Eckhart or Thomas Merton or you know, Juliana Norwich, or you know, any of these people, they're starting to sound like language I wouldn't mind using, and to describe, you know, my experience. And you know, in 2009, when I had a dream of a waterfall, it was kind of a Trinitarian structure to the dream, you know, like, and I've described this before, where there's the above the rim that we can't see, like we're at the bottom and we can't see above the rim, and then there's the water that pours over the rim, the waterfalls itself, and then there's where it hits the ground and spreads out. And I saw in my dream that above the rim that we can't see is that invisible, infinite source, which Christians like to call God, and then the manifestation of God, or the incarnation of God, is what Christians call the Christ. And then where Christ, you know, impacts the earth and spreads over the earth to reconcile all things, that's the Holy Spirit. And so in my dream, I understood that, but I also understood that the Buddhists might see that same thing, but have different words to explain it, and so on. And so when I woke up that morning, I had such peace of mind because I realized there's only one reality with all kinds of apprehensions of it and articulations of it. And it was just such a peace of mind that it hasn't gone away. It's been 9 years. And it was then when I realized, hey, labels don't matter. This is just all just words and thoughts that we think divide us, but that's all they are. It's just a thought, just words. But there's just one reality, and in which we all swim, so to speak. So, that's kind of the way I try to describe it now. Now, for a lot of people, that's not satisfying because I'm not using the lingo.
Right.
Like when you look at a can with the label on it, one of the first things you do is you look at the ingredients.
Sure.
And a lot of people, when they try to read me, they can't find the ingredients they're looking for.
Right.
And I hate to disappoint you, but I'm very happy. I'm delicious. But I just don't happen to have the ingredients that you're exactly looking for, or using the words that you need me to use.
Yeah.
In order for you to feel better about life.
Yeah, and it's that label. It's that tribe that we try to like subscribe to and figure out, and we want to be a part of, or whatever.
Right.
I think it speaks more to ourselves, of our own insecurities of like not belonging or whatever that might be, than to kind of like really dive into who we are and to figure out what we are, and not versus like what we subscribe to, but who are you, as the individual.
Well, it's
the process of seeking it, I guess.
Yeah. So your deconstruction was launched because of a certain question or a certain issue. Mm-hmm. My issue was the inspiration and infallibility of Scripture, inerrancy of Scripture, and what inspiration, infallibility, and inerrancy of Scripture. I embraced that fully all through my teen years, all through my Bible college, all through seminary, until the day of my graduation in seminary. I suddenly realized that it was like the Jenga block tower. The whole tower was resting on that one block called Scripture. Yeah. And when that got knocked out, everything I believed in crumbled. Like everything fell. Yeah. And it absolutely freaked me out. I was terrifying. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what to do. And it just it was like the floor, was removed from under my feet, and I was dropped into this dark abyss, and I couldn't find the ladder to get out. It was just that unbelievably traumatic. It was a crisis. And I think that's what a lot of people try to avoid. That's why we hang on to our doctrines and our ideologies and our words and everything so firmly, because we know if we let that one thing go, it's like the thin end of the wedge. Yeah. And
you can see it start to wobble.
That's right.
You know what's happening.
Gonna go.
Yeah, I spoke to one of my previous guests, Brady Peters. We kind of had a conversation. He kind of had that same thing, it was this identity crisis with who he was when he came face to face with people that were loving people and different than what he had known and grown up. And he had this identity crisis of like, am I a Christian? Are they like, are they going to hell? Am I going to hell? That because I, like whatever, all these different things. And he kind of had that same thing. It was just this like complete identity crisis, and has found his way since, but it took a lot of time and these panic attacks and anxiety attacks that came from that. And it's I think I've had that, but it's different. It's been a slower process. It's not been that like drastic, like the Jenga, the whole tower fell at one time. It was, I kind of took the pieces off and then, then got mad and then threw them on the floor. And then,
exactly. Well, to be more clear, I read this book. I don't know why I read this book. It wasn't on any of the syllabi or anything. And it was just before, like it was the day I was graduating from seminary. I was actually in my robe to go to the ceremony. And I was like, oh no.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was that. I read
Wow.
this book and it like totally screwed me up big
And
time.
then 30 more
But
years.
but it took, yeah, it was like the crack
Wow.
was in the foundation, and I knew it. I saw it, and I knew I was in trouble. But it took 30 years. Yeah, it took 30 years for me to finally integrate that happily into my life. You know,
Wow.
it was like a glacial movement of
Yeah.
deconstruction, but it was, you know, I could feel it.
But it's led you to where you are today, and that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm never been happier.
Yeah.
I literally, my mind theologically is at peace. It's at rest.
Mm-hmm.
I don't worry. You know, it's well, I worry about life like anybody
Sure.
else.
Yeah, of course.
But what I'm saying is theologically,
Mm-hmm.
it's I was in so much angst for all those years,
Yeah.
theological angst, and then all of a sudden it was gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not like I gave up, because I did want to give up.
Yeah.
I was at the point of throwing in the towel, and that's when I had the dream, and I woke up with peace of mind, and it was an integration. It wasn't a rejection. It was an integration.
Yeah, and you write about that a lot on your blog, and for people
Right.
that are interested in reading about that, it's called, what is it, Theory Z?
The Z theory. Yeah.
Z theory, yeah. So if you're interested, if you're listening and you're interested in about that dream and about some of the different thoughts around that, definitely check out the blog. There's a lot more in-depth conversation on his blog.
And my book too,
Oh, yeah.
Questions Are the Answer, is kind of like my memoir, and I explain that as good as I can.
Awesome.
Well, I need to do better, but that's the best book for getting an idea of where I'm coming from.
Sure.
If you care.
Yeah, absolutely. Check out the book. You've got several books on here too, and we can talk about those as well.
Yeah.
But David, you are a married man. You have children. When did your wife come into the picture of your life?
Oh man, at Bible college.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm a Canadian.
Yep.
And I live in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I went down to Central Bible College, a Pentecostal Assembly of God college in Springfield, Missouri.
Okay.
And Lisa is from Alabama, way down south.
Yep.
Holiness background, and she went to the same college, and we met, fell in love, and got married as soon as I graduated. I was 22, and she was 19.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been together ever since, and we have 3 grown children now. And yeah, we were literally on the same page for all those years.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then I left the ministry, and then that's when we really struggled in our marriage.
Yeah.
We'd been married 30 years when I left the ministry.
Wow. Yeah.
And we really struggled. Like, that's one of the things I really care about too, is deconstruction when it happens with married people.
Mm-hmm.
It's I see a lot of marriages blow up, and it's a real struggle for a lot of people. And it was for Lisa and I, because we were so much on the same page, and then all of a sudden we started realizing we didn't quite believe the same. We were no longer a team in terms of ministry, because I had to go get a real job, and she went back to university, became a nurse, and all this stuff was going on, and we had to figure out what was the glue that really held us together.
Sure.
And it couldn't be compatible belief. That was gone.
Yeah.
And we came. It took us a couple of years to finally realize that it was just love. I hate to sound so cheesy and hallmarky, but it's true. It was just love. Love will keep us together, like the Carpenters. Was that the Carpenters? Sang.
I'm not sure.
Love will keep us together. Anyway, for Captain and Tennille, I don't know. Anyway, that it really was love that, and which means respecting one another, giving one another space to be who they are, to discover themselves, however they say fit, how to be spiritual, however they wish. This is what love is. So, and we're doing better than we ever have. But
That's awesome.
it was a difficult transition.
Now, does your wife have the same ideas or quote theology that you do nowadays, or is that still something you guys philosophize about or talk about and go back and forth about?
Yeah, we talk about. We don't argue or or anything. But it's more like a wonder at one another's spiritual preferences, and Lisa's. She has her preferences. I have mine, but we do both. Come from that understanding that there's one reality. She's interpreting reality and apprehending it through her own lenses, as am I. And then she's got her own language she uses to describe her experience of this one reality. And we both, just understanding that, creates a very spacious space in which to have healthy conversations and relationships.
Yeah. What I know, so speaking to my friend Brady Peters, who, one of the big things that he came face to face with was, salvation, this heaven and hell, and who's saved, who's not. And I know in the Christian faith, Christian church, the fundamental Christian church, that's a big part of the church. And I don't know, but did she struggle with that of embracing the fact of wow, my husband in the fundamental Christian church is quote going to hell, or is that a conversation that was a struggle? Was that something you guys had to really work through? How I guess if it's not, then there's more follow-up questions if it is, but
it was a difficult time. I mean, because when you start drifting away from your previous beliefs, and they're really strong beliefs, it's very, very unsettling. I have a lot of atheist friends or agnostic friends that don't understand how traumatic it is for someone to stop or question their beliefs, or to stop believing something that they might think is completely ridiculous. Or it wasn't all that traumatic when you stopped believing in Santa Claus. I mean, maybe one Christmas might have been a little bit of a downer, but you get over it and you move on. Why can't you just there's no fairies, there's no whatever, there's no unicorns.
It's your identity, though. It's that identity
they don't understand. It's so enmeshed in our identity.
Yeah.
Our beliefs aren't just thoughts; they are actually enmeshed and entangled with how we eat, who we can hang out with, what kind of jobs we can have, what we can watch on TV, what we can listen to on the radio, how we have sex. How we raise our kids.
Yep.
Everything is affected by it. So I remember lying there in bed in cold sweats, afraid I was going to hell because I didn't believe in hell. How do you make sense of that? You can't make sense of that.
No.
And so,
but I get
Lisa
it.
I
understand what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lisa and I, we'd be talking, and she'd well, do you pray anymore? What's prayer? And I'm like,
yeah.
It's here
That's
we
a whole
go.
other thing.
I really don't know.
Yeah.
And those kind of conversations were really difficult. They're not anymore. But at that time when you're in transition, it's terrifying. It's kind of like Israel when they were leaving Egypt. Those leeks and onions, the familiar is so secure and comforting, and we really do feel tempted to go back. And I see that a lot with a lot of people who are deconstructing. They start freaking out, and I've seen this happen even to a couple of friends of mine who are deconstructing, and they're like, "This is freaking me out," and then they go back to an earlier stage of belief, and they become even more fundamentalist than they were before because they do not want to approach that danger zone again.
Yeah, it's scary. It's very scary. I
Very scary.
I struggled with a long time, and I feel like it's been in, the last couple of years that I've really started to move outside of this. But with people that believe and believe the same thing, like that fundamental Christian values, and call themselves Christians and all this, of being like supporting things that they're involved with, or supporting Christian organizations, almost as this, that like they're mutually exclusive, that like loving them and not calling myself a Christian is like this. I can't do that because I don't believe the same things they do. And
Hmm.
I've really moved beyond that now. I just don't care, And I know that
Right.
maybe people within the fundamental Christian viewpoint, obviously there's a different view from that perspective. But
Right.
I just don't care. I think that, I have a friend who, he's Mexican. His family immigrated here back when he was a child, and he came face to face. We did a podcast. His name's Jonathan Moya. Came face to face with, kind of his identity in some ways, in his Christian values of like, I call myself a Christian, I call myself a conservative, Republican, but the rhetoric is against me. So how, I don't understand,
Hmm.
like he's like came face to face in a lot of ways with his own identity. Him and his brother went down to the border, took their own little adventure. They're seeking answers to, some of these questions they had, and going along the border and into these cities and asking questions. And
Right.
basically it came out as he created his own organization called Border Perspective, and it's changing perspective of people within the Christian church, of their perspective on immigrants, migrants, asylum seekers. And I think it's awesome. I love it.
Cool.
I think it's so cool, and I want to support
It
that.
is.
And it was one of those things
Yeah.
where I I quote came out on the podcast as not being, quote, a Christian or whatever, and because I wanted people to see and to understand that like they're not mutually exclusive. Like I can
I bet
believe
that
in
went over well.
I haven't had too much pushback.
Okay.
Surprisingly, maybe it's because there's not enough people hearing it. I don't know, but yeah, it's one of those things that it's like they're not mutually exclusive. Like I can support his cause. I can believe in his cause. I can believe in what he's trying to do. Christianity's not
Right.
going anywhere, but love
Right.
and acceptance and this empowerment of people, the minorities, of what Jesus speaks to in the Bible is important, and it's real, and it needs to be shared.
Yeah.
And so this idea of like this mutually exclusive, like I have to believe exactly what you believe in order for me to support what you're doing or the things that you're a part of, is a newer
Hmm.
thing for me that I've been exploring, I guess, more recently. Did you ever go through phases like that, or is that something you've ever faced or thought about?
There were times after I left the ministry, and uh, uh, there's two kinds of deconstructions. One is from like theological deconstruction.
Yeah.
Another one is ecclesiological deconstruction.
Okay.
And so, so one is where we start questioning our beliefs, and then the other one is when we struggle with our relationship with the church.
Yeah.
And they don't. If somebody struggles, has a theological deconstruction, usually it'll also include a church deconstruction.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily happen the other way. When somebody has a church deconstruction, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have a theological one.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I left the ministry, I'd already had my theological deconstruction, but now I was having to work through my church deconstruction and my relationship to the church and believers.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to figure that out. And there were times when I was really pissed off, excuse
Yeah.
my language, but I got angry. I became resentful.
Mm-hmm.
I despised, the narrowness and the stupidity of very fundamentalist, all this kind of thing, and the destruction of it,
Yeah.
or the destructiveness of it, rather. And I had to go through those, like you. I had to come to a place where I realized we're all on spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean autism. I mean spectrum of belief.
Yeah.
Somewhere we're all somewhere on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And just to have grace for that, not necessarily I'm better or more advanced or anything like that. Just that I'm in a different place, and I need to respect where other people are in their journeys too. And often, like for example, let's say on Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
I'll have some people come at me with really strong hate, and I can just feel it in their words that they're very nasty people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? If you can't be nice, I might have to block you. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then there's other people who come at me who are saying almost the same things, but I can tell it's a nice person, and they're doing their best to be righteous, right?
Yeah.
And to speak truth, and I can tell the difference. And I always try to engage whoever comes at me. I always try to engage them in conversation, and hopefully come to a place where we mutually understand, and hopefully even mutually agree. And I'm I used to think of growth as linear, where we were moving along a trail and we'd get more and more advanced the further along we got. And then I thought, no, that's not very good, because you leave stuff behind, and I don't like that model. So I thought of stages.
Yeah.
And I thought, that doesn't work either, because it implies I'm getting higher and better than other people. So now I think of growth as spatial, where we grow outward to include where we've been before.
Yeah.
So I'm growing out, and it includes all my previous selves and previous manifestations and beliefs and everything. It all gets subsumed into who I am. Mm-hmm. And I don't reject any of it. It's just all of who I am. And that, when I treat myself that way, it helps me to treat others the same.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. And that kind of spills us over into you're a very inclusive person, united as one, love is the only answer. And that spills into, some of what society might consider, even the Christian church, the fundamental Christian church might consider, our marginalized people in some ways, the ones that haven't always been accepted, including the LGBTQ plus community, equal rights and for women and for just humanity and humans and people in general.
Right.
You do a lot of art that shows the ironies of some of the things in the Bible that are said, and in an effort to include and to show the LGBTQ plus community that they belong. I love that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's a lot of what I do. Yeah. Because for.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead with whatever you were going to say. I was just going to kind of probe that a little bit more. So I love that. I think it's really great. Yeah, I just love, I know, this is one of those big sticking points. So coming from, like I said before, I came from this, my college that I went to, it's a small liberal arts college, a conservative Christian school in northern Indiana. Bethel University. And, a lot of my friends and a lot of people that I ran around with are in very similar places or on different, like you were talking about before, different areas of the spectrum, different on this line. But all in trying to figure out how this fits in with their life due to the people they love and these different communities. And, some of these people are now able to come out, and they've found their identity and been able to feel welcome and loved just by the communities that after leaving that and kind of deconstructing. And I have friends, I believe that the LGBTQ plus community is beautiful and they are who they are, right? This is they're human beings, they're people, and I can't say that I always understand, but that's not doesn't mean that they don't belong. It means that I need to do better about understanding and asking more questions and helping to remove some of the ignorance that I have. And I have family members. I have people within my family that are LGBTQ+, and I think it's beautiful. I think your message is really important for that community and just for people in general, just to open their eyes and to think things differently, to understand and just to look through a different lens. It's not just this like one way or the other. I don't want to use, I don't know, just, it's not there's multiple shades of gray in life and where everybody's at. And it's not just a black and white issue across the board with whatever issue it is. It's like you have to look through the different lenses that people come at and who people are, and at the end of the day we have to respect and love, and everybody deserves that. Everybody deserves love. Everybody deserves to be treated like a human being, and like they deserve to be like you want to be treated. It's that golden rule. Just love people, treat people properly and rightly.
You know what I compare it to?
What's that?
I compare it to Paul trying to convince the earliest church to include Gentiles.
Yeah, I saw you.
It's that same dynamic that's happening. And that's why people are like, why do you keep going on about the LGBTQ community? Are you gay? Or why won't you shut up about that? Or other people, even more malicious, are like, oh, you're just doing that because it gets clicks and you sell your prints and all this kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
You can edit that out if you...
No, I don't care.
Okay.
You can cuss, you can say whatever you want.
It's the same dynamic that's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
The earliest church had issues with the Gentiles, not because they weren't Jewish.
Yeah.
It was because of their lifestyle. It was because of how they lived, who they were. Gentiles wasn't just like, okay, they're not Jews, they can't be admitted. It went deeper than that.
Yeah.
And that's why we see these weird things in Acts and stuff that, okay, you're allowed to be a member, but you have to cure the meat. You can't eat bloody meat. You got all this kind of weird rules just because they needed these people to sort of fall in line with what was expected to live a respectful way. And I think that's what's happening now with the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
Is that we want to love you, we want to include you, but you have to stop.
Yeah. But it's the but.
It's not possible.
It's always the but.
Yeah, that's right.
Instead of just like, no, we accept you, we love you. You are who you are. You are who you're supposed to be. And
Christians have such big butts.
So many.
So many big butts.
Yes. And that's isn't that one of your, don't you have a piece of art like with that?
No, but I might.
Oh, it's the...
I might draw that.
Yeah, there you go. You should. It's the left... What was it?
Left Behind.
Left Behind. Yeah. That's what I was thinking of.
Behind,
I like that one.
No, I don't have a cartoon about big butts, but that's a good one.
There you go. Now you got some material to work with. Janelle, I was asking her, I was like, hey, David's coming on the podcast. Do you have any things I should ask? And this was one of her questions. And so I wanted to ask it. Janelle, the gal who introduced me to you.
Yeah.
And she wanted me to ask, like, what advice you would give churches that are not accepting or not affirming of members of the LGBTQ plus community. I know, throwing you under the bus
throwing
again.
Me into the deep end. Yeah. I have a really good friend who has a ministry that reaches out to churches to help them become affirming, from non-affirming to affirming. And she said it's a really weird in-between place because the churches that aren't affirming don't want her to come and speak to them. And the
Yeah.
people that are affirming, churches that are affirming, don't need her
Right.
because they're already affirming. So she's in this kind of weird place.
Yeah, like a
and
limbo. Yeah.
rarely do churches come to this place where they're like, you know what, we need to become more affirming. We need to get in a professional and somebody to help us through this very difficult process, but this is what we want.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen a lot. That's very rare. So, yeah, your question's sort of in that in-between place. You know, I'll tell you, my cartoons, I just hope my cartoons are like the drip, 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 drip that eventually erodes away a stone.
Yeah.
I hope what I'm doing, what so many other people are doing, will eventually wear away the resistance to grace and love that's so prevalent right now in the church.
Yeah, I hope so too. I agree, and it's I know there are a lot of people out there. You know, I'm sure there's people on both sides of the spectrum, but there are sure pastors out there that do believe that the LGBTQ plus community should be a part of their community and part of their congregation, and I think those are but it's fundamentally it's a, you have to, in order to accept those people, you have to give up everything that, you know, your identity, kind of like what we've been talking about. And I think that that's probably some of I'm just assuming, I guess, but I believe that there are people out there that are wrestling with that and trying to figure out a way, and you know, dealing with that in their own way. And there's a lot of politics in the church, as you know. So,
well, you know, I just read an article the other day, and somebody live messaged me. They were at this event where Boz Chividian, you know who I mean?
I don't know who that is. No.
He's Billy Graham's grandson, who's a lawyer. I think he's a lawyer who is an advocate for people who've suffered from spiritual abuse or sexual assault or whatever in the church.
Yeah.
And he represents these people. And he was speaking at a Southern Baptist convention on the weekend and actually challenged them on their treatment of women and how they've been handling the charges or the accusations of sexual assault, etc., among their churches, which has been really like crazy epidemic. And I thought, and she messaged me like, can you like look at this, watch this? And I'm like, holy smokes, this is like kind of important. This is kind of important for such a fundamentalist, conservative organization, the largest denomination in the world, I think, outside of Roman Catholicism, and who actually has somebody standing up front challenging them on their treatment of women and how they've handled their cases of assault and abuse. Wow. So that gave me some hope.
Yeah.
And then I read some of my comments and I get discouraged again. So it's kind of like that. There does seem to be like this tidal creeping of progress, but then it ebbs again. Yeah. And it gets discouraging. But then the next time it flows, it seems to get a little bit further. And so I'm kind of placing my bet on that kind of progress.
I hope so. I think we're moving in the right direction. I think you know, the millennial generation gets a bad rap, but I think they're good people. I think they care a lot about the world and care a lot about the people around them, and they have big empathetic hearts, and I think we're in good hands. It still takes this conversation. It still keeps. We have to keep bringing this up. We have to keep talking about it. We have to keep pushing that forward. Yeah. But you know, I think time is on our side. It's something I say a lot.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. David, I like to ask people what are as we kind of close things out and kind of get close to like wrapping up here, what do you want people to know about you?
I want people to know that I love helping people.
Yeah.
That's what I do. You know, I had a lot of people say, you can't call yourself the naked pastor anymore because you don't have a church anymore. And I'm like, then there's others who are like, well, you're kind of like a naked pastor without his church on.
Yeah.
And or I'm an online pastor or whatever.
Yeah.
And some people say, you still have a pastor's heart. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression.
Yeah.
But
such a classic.
I really do care about people. I love people. I really want to help people. And one of the thing I love doing the most is helping people feel validated in their, spiritual journeys and their identities. When somebody, like even this morning, somebody wrote me to say, like, your cartoons and posts have meant so much to me. I feel like I'm okay. I'm not crazy, that I'm fine. And to me, that just makes my day.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That's what I'm about. I'm not about, I'm selling my art. I'm selling memberships in my community. I'm selling this and that and courses and books. But you know what? It's just to help me do what I love to do, and that's helping people.
I agree. Yeah. Don't stop. Keep going.
No,
I really want to encourage you, as well. It does feel good. Sometimes it feels like this solo journey that you're on. I know it's felt that way for me. I'm getting emotional even talking about it, but yeah, it's just it has felt at times like this solo journey that I've been on to get to where I'm at, to be in this place that I feel so like comfortable and I feel so happy. Not comfortable in like a comfort way, but like I'm not at war with myself anymore. And
such a beautiful thing, man.
Yeah, and I feel good. I feel healthy. I feel happy, and I'm continually striving to be the best person that I can be. And Crazy Face Uno is spurred from that, and I want to share people's stories. I want this connection. We live in such a digital age, and this community of technology, or this world of technology, and we can either push against it and be overtaken by it, or we can go with the flow, and we can embrace it, and we can go with it, and be a part of where our society is going, and through storytelling and through the future of Crazy Face Uno, where we want to tell people's stories, and not just through the podcast, but through other ways. And we're growing, and we're working towards that as we speak. But I want to be inclusive and to welcome in similar ways. It's allowing people to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to share their life, to share their experiences, and to connect people, and to see that we're more alike than we are different, and to empower, to love, and to celebrate people. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, the loneliness, that's one of the biggest things people struggle with after they leave the church. And I totally get it. Yeah. But you know what? Like, I have amazing friends around the world that I've never seen face to face. I've never been with them in body. But, like conversations like the one we just had, how could it be any better except maybe sitting across the table with a beer?
Yeah, that would have been better.
That's the only thing that could have made it better.
That would have been better. But I agree. This is awesome. This is such a great. Yeah, it's so rich, and it's necessary, and that's what I want from these conversations. I want people to listen and go, I went on a similar journey, or I really like what they said in that, and that's what I get. I get texts, I get messages from people and being like, oh, hey, like, I really like what so-and-so said. Or sometimes it's just my friends, that are engaging, but they're like, hey, that was really cool. Like, I never thought about it like that. And I think that there's going to be some positive that comes out of this as well. And I love that. So.
Absolutely. No, you're doing a good thing. That's for sure.
Thank you, David.
Keep it up.
I appreciate it. Same to you. How can people, you've got books online,
Well, go to nakedpastor.com. I'm there, and it will send you wherever you want to go. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Pinterest. I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
I got a couple of accounts.
Yeah.
And I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on everywhere. And you just Google Naked Pastor, one word, or David Hayward. And The Lasting Supper, that's my online community. Yeah, I have books on Amazon, and, I sell my prints and art. So, yeah. And I'm really good at responding to people when they reach out to me. So don't be afraid or shy to do that.
Perfect. And we'll make sure we share your handles as well and your website, and hopefully we can get you some traction that way. David, thank you
Cool.
so much. I really appreciate it. We really appreciate you coming
You're
on
welcome.
and having a conversation with us. Hey,
Yeah,
everybody,
I've enjoyed it.
as you're listening, remember, do good, make a difference in this world. Find those ways to do that. The simplest thing of smiling at somebody, saying hi, saying thank you. Find a way. If you have the time and you're interested, go check out crazyfaceuno.com. We have some merchandise. We have some mugs. You can buy a mug to support our cause and support what we're creating here. There's ways for you to donate, get more involved. Listen, like, share. We love you all. Thank you so much. Peace.